Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining in on this webinar on a very, very important process-related topic of human resource management, which is leave management, and we would be discussing new age leave management today. This webinar is brought to you by CHRMP. CHRMP stands for Certified Human Resource Management Professional. CHRMP is a premier HR certification, something which is globally recognized. It is also competency-based certification. So if you have ever wondered names of departments in human resource changing, recruitment being called talent acquisition and training and development being called learning and development or talent development or employee engagement terminologies coming to forte rather than employee relations. There is a reason to it. The reason is increased practices of competency-based HR, and we can proudly say that CHRMP, being a competency-based certification, has a lot of value to add in terms of how things are currently and how things are shaping up in times to come. Right. We are talking about having close to 5,600 test centers in about close to 190 countries. And we are talking about our certification partner being Pearson VUE. We are talking about more than 10,000 strong alumni base. So if you ever go to LinkedIn, just type CHRMP, you'd be able to see people from different organizations, people from different, at different levels, right from being an entry-level HR, being an HR executive, to CHROs and HR directors, to HR analysts, to talent acquisition specialist, to HR analyst. You would find CHRMPs everywhere in almost every country. My name is Animesh. I come with about 17 years of work experience, and I have consulted with a number of Fortune 10, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies in terms of helping them set up their HR processes. And I would be the lead facilitator for this webinar today. And we would be discussing a very interesting and an important topic of leave management. But before I get into that, I think it's very, very important that we understand few elements about human resource, right? Now, human resource is a very, very generic vertical. There is a lot that people are doing. It is also very, very diversified when I say in terms of it, the kind of element of importance that it brings in. It is one of the most diversified support functions that we are talking about. And it's also changing hugely, right? So we need to create an understanding on that.
Don't forget to press the like button and leave your comment. Share the video and subscribe to our channel for more HR-related content. To never miss a notification on our latest uploads, make sure you hit the bell icon.
And the way we can go about creating an understanding is busting some myths. But before I start by busting some myths, I think it's important that I make a quick promise. I'm making a promise that by end of this session, all of you would have a thorough understanding of how leaves are managed. What I need in return is your complete attention. A lot of times we are surrounded by devices, people, etc. There are distractions, and each slide here is loaded with information connected to each other. So just in case you miss one, you may not be able to follow later. So I just want your complete dedication in terms of listening to this webinar, and that would make sure that this promise of you having a thorough understanding of how leaves are managed is done. Just in case anybody logs out because of the heavy participation in today's webinar, you can go to YouTube channel and go to CHRMP, and you would be able to like our, you can see the webinar live there, right? Also subscribe, because that would keep you posted with upcoming webinars whenever it happens, and make learning a continuous thing, right? Okay, wonderful. With this, let's quickly start by talking about some myths about human resource career. It's a very, very important time, very, very crucial time to have the right information with us. And I think at CHRMP, we make sure that some of the most common myths that people have about careers in HR and future in HR being busted and being taken care of. The first myth that I would like to bust today is that you can't reach a senior C-level position being in HR, right? So When we talk about C level positions, then we are talking about CEO, we are talking about COO, we are talking about CFO, we are talking about CTO, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Operations Officer, Chief Financial Officer. And for a very, very long time, yes, that's true, there was no CHRO, right? Or CPO, right? Chief People Officer. And largely, if you look at, you would have Vice President HR or head HR or director HR, and that is where the designation ended, because largely it was seen as a support function, which is to a greater extent executing what business wanted in terms of people management and uh, human resource related aspects or an administration related aspect. But this thing has changed, right? And it's very, very important for us to understand that any modern day organization today, human asset management is a very, very, very important aspect of running the entire business. And that's why you have CHROs today. In fact, a lot of CHROs and CPOs, which is Chief People Officers, are becoming CEOs of organizations. There is umpteen number of examples in there, whether we talk about Xerox or Shell, or whether we talk about Manipal, whether we talk about a lot of organizations where people from human resource were the chief executive officers in times to come. But otherwise, also there is a CHRO, which is very good news for anybody who's associated with HR, because we have much more important role to play, which is very, very important, right? The second thing is, and second and third myth is slightly futuristic, right? And when I say slightly futuristic, a lot of times when we talk about future, we talk about future which is 20, 30, 40, or maybe some time machine, that time travel involving us taking there, etc. In there. No, we are not talking about in there. We are talking about what is going to change in next 5 or 10 years. So yes, AI and ML is picking up a big time. A very good example of AI and ML is Amazon Alexa or Siri in Apple, or you have OK Google. All that is perfect example of a lot of things changing. But there is a lot of other things also changing when it comes to AI and ML. And there is this fear that a lot of jobs in human resource would be lost to AI and ML, right? And I think with any technological change, that's always the case, right? Even when computers came in for the first time, I think there was a lot of uh, conversations and a lot of discussions in terms of computers replacing uh, 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 human beings and computers taking over. So yes, AI and ML is coming and we need to be prepared. But the way to prepare ourselves is not to worry about the kind of job losses AI and ML will do, because certainly AI and ML will do a lot of job losses, and especially in areas like talent acquisition. You would have a lot of job losses, because all that is happening by an individual in terms of sourcing, in terms of matching resumes, in terms of shortlisting, in terms of sending a mail, in terms of all that is something that computers can do. And there are softwares which can do. Even as I speak, they're there. Almost they say that 8 out of 10 jobs in talent acquisition would current jobs would go, right? But then there are a lot of new jobs that would also come in, right? And I, towards the end of this webinar, I would talk about future of HR so that you are better prepared and you understand where the world is heading. So yes, AI and ML are going to replace jobs, but that doesn't mean that majority of jobs would go. It just means that a new crop of HR jobs would be born, and there would be new kind of roles that would you would start hearing very, very soon, right? Which is very, very interesting, isn't it? A lot of new exciting stuff coming for HRs, especially for HRs who are constantly upskilling themselves, right? And the third myth is uh, about future of HR will just be an extension to what's happening now, right? So we are all knowing that human resource is about number of things, right? From a person getting into the organization to a person going out of the organization. The entire support system is human resource, right? So whether it's recruitment and selection, or whether it's performance management, whether it's training and development, whether it's compensation, benefit, payroll, whether it's HR administration, or whether it's personal management, or whether it is employee relation, employee engagement. HRs are doing number of things, right? And what we would be doing ahead is nothing but an extension of today. So I would suggest that HR is, if you look at uh, what the future upholds for HR. There is lots that's going to change. The future job roles. You would, in fact, if I name some 20, 30 new designations that are coming through, some of them which are already floating across in US, UK, Europe, etc., you would be surprised that, in fact, a lot of it you would have not even heard of. That kind of job roles is something that we are anticipating and the world is heading towards, right? So it would not be necessarily an extension of what we are currently doing in HR, right? There would be a lot of new things that would come in, and a lot of differentiation in HR's job of future. And when I say future, I'm talking not again 40, 50 years, I'm just talking 5 to 10 years, right? And what you would be seeing today, right? Knowing what's happening right now, it's important. I'm not saying it makes you aware of the HR processes and systems, but the way the work would happen would change a lot, and we would be dwelling it in some time, right? Very, very important. I always start with bursting these myths because I want every listener to be prepared for future, because career planning is not today. Career planning is having a futuristic view of 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, and then breaking it back down in here. Just how organizations plan, that's how careers are also planned, right? So if you want to see yourself as a CHRO in next 10 years, which may look challenging for few, but it's possible because there are people who with 10 to 15 years of experience are CHROs today, right? And what they did at this point of time is important, isn't it? So what you do right now is very, very important compared, which should be in line with you achieving your larger goals, right? So I would be talking about that as well, but I don't want to digress from the topic because all of you are here for talking about this very interesting topic called leave management. As I said, it is process related, so it might get slightly boring. So just in case anybody wants to yawn, we are all online. You're not in a classroom. Feel free to do that. Even make some noise while yawning. That's still okay. But then don't miss the important bits, because when we talk about leave management, it is process related, it is systems related, but it's and any process, any system, any policy sounds boring, but very, very important. Yeah, very, very important in terms of knowing how leave management is being done, and especially how new age leave management is being driven, right? Great. So this is what I would be talking about today. I would be talking about understanding leaves. We talk about leave management. We talk about types of leaves. We talk about loss of pay calculation, and I would be talking about implementing a leave calendar. And then I would also talk about what's changing in pandemic, because it looks like pandemic is here to stay. We were very hopeful that it may go in 1 or 2 months, but it is already 7 or 8 months, and the nearest that people are talking about is mid 2021. There are also a lot of thinkers which are talking about it lasting till end of 2021, which is beginning of 2022 is something when things may settle down completely. This would be very similar to what happened about 100 years back in terms of Spanish flu, which took close to 2 to 3 years in terms of completely subsiding. So yes, but then organizations and businesses are running, world is open, travel is becoming more popular, at least country travel is happening in almost all the countries that we are aware of, if it's not international travel. And all that is impacting leaves. And then we need to understand how exactly it's functioning. So I would, towards the end, I would also talk about post calendar that, and then I would talk about future of HR, and that's how we would be talking in, right? Great. So let's get going. So when we talk about leaves, now what is leaves, right? A lot of times when I ask what is a leave, they say, and I think leave is one bit which always excites everyone, especially anybody who's working, right? If not the employer, at least the employee is really excited about apply any orientation, any onboarding, when it happens, when policy discussions happen. I think maximum number of questions are asked in leave and compensation policies, right? Because that is what matters to us a lot as employees, isn't it? Right? But then when a lot of times when I have asked HRs, okay, what is a leave? So then they say leave is when you can take a day off, right? But then we have to understand that yes, that's true that you can take a day off, but any leave, the whole idea of leave is that you can be absent from work, but you also get paid for, right? That's the idea of a leave, right? So what is a leave? Leave is nothing but you can be absent from work or duty and also get paid. There are two elements to it. So you're off, but at the same time you are getting paid, right? And Organizations go about providing employees with leaves on the days on using which around which they can go about taking an off, which is an important aspect, right? Now, the moment you go about exhausting all your current leaves, which means, or if you have been given X number of leaves and if you've gone about exhausting all your leaves, then there is loss of pay is something that happens, right? So leave and loss of pay are anti each other. Leaves are paid. All the leaves are paid, right? Whether we are talking about a national holiday or whether we are talking about a festival or whether we are talking about a sick leave or whether we are talking about a casual leave. And I would talk about all those leaves, right? But largely when we talk about all these leaves, these are all leaves which are paid. And when all these leaves get exhausted, you have loss of pay. And some organizations go about taking disciplinary action, and that's very very evident in some setups. For example, when you talk about military or when you talk about police, they are very very particular that you're not even an hour late on the day of duty or on the day of rejoining, right? So disciplinary action is taken if somebody goes, and a lot of other organizations also go about taking leaves. A lot of times when people miss work for 2 or 3 days and it's uninformed, and then they call it uninformed leaves, disciplinary action is taken, right? So either there is loss of pay or there is disciplinary action in most of the organizations that we are talking about. And this is something which is anti-leave. So on one side, leave is about giving your employees paid time off, but at the same time, it is also about loss of pay in case of extending it beyond what was allotted to you, and also disciplinary action in number of cases, right? Now, when we talk about how organizations go about allotting these leaves, we are talking about leaves which are as per statutory requirements. So a lot of governments across the globe, as part of labor laws, as part of workmen compensation, as part of policy, that they go about suggesting that an organization should go about giving X number of leaves for Y number of reasons, right? So that is something that is very, very specific to the country and specific to the labor law of that region or that country, right? And a lot of times it also happens is that there is a discussion with employees, whether it can be a union in number of cases where the union representing the organization has an interaction with the management and they talk about. A lot of times it can be just mutual, that you normally talk about it and you come across with leaves which employees go about cherishing. So these are the ways you go about allotting leaves. Not only this, I think a lot of times organizations also go about allotting leaves keeping employee welfare in mind, because they want to create a healthy workplace. A lot of time exhausting people too much with too much of work leads to drop in productivity, and organizations see this interesting aspect. And there is a lot of experiments that have been done, right, in terms of increasing, enhancing leaves, reducing work hours, etc., where productivity was either the same or it increased. For example, in Scandinavian countries, countries like Sweden, Norway, they made 4-day working, right? And they experimented it with number of organizations, and then they saw that 4-day working is leading to more efficiency and more effectiveness for employees compared to a 5-day working. At certain places, the number of work hours was reduced, right? So instead of, so this is not really leave, but this is like more like a work timing policy. But then, these are all experiments that are happening in different parts of the globe. So the dots do get connected. And when the number of work hours were reduced from 8 or 9 to 6, they saw higher productivity and most of the goals being met by different employees in different organizations. So, yes, the employee welfare is a very, very important aspect. And a lot of times what you do for your employees in terms of working around leaves is something that increases your BPW rating, right? BPW means best place to work, right? So BPW rating is very, very important. I'm sure you would keep hearing a lot of organizations advertising, or if you're following some HR literature or magazines, you would see that X organization got rewarded for best place to work or something else. For men, for women, for everyone, lot of other categories are there. But leaves play a very, very important role. So when a lot of times as HRs, and if some of you would have done that, when you go about submitting your application to these awards, one of a big section that you need to take care of is in terms of what innovation have you done in terms of employee leaves, right? So that is also an important aspect when it comes to allotting your leaves. These are all things, if you're an HR or an HR manager, you need to keep in mind while discussing deciding on leaves, right? You have, as I said, legal considerations are important. You have labor laws of the country, and then you have state laws of the country. It depends on the country that you are in. For example, if I take a case of US, or if I take a case of India, you have central labor laws, and you have state labor laws, and then laws which are created by the center, which is the central government. The implementing authority is the state, and you can have your own set of laws. For example, the place that I am in currently, I'm in Bangalore. 1st of November is a state holiday, though it's not a national holiday. The reason being is that there is a Karnataka Rajyotsava Day, which is formation of the state that I belong to, and 1st of November everything is closed, right? But this is not so either it's the central laws or the state laws or the region that we are talking about. And basically laws are based on various things. It can be based on industry, it can be based on the number of working hours or working days that we are talking about, it can be based on the kind of family situations that employees have, it can be based on the festival and holidays that is coming in, it can be based on disabilities, it can be based on for medical reasons, there can be a number of things. So when we talk about the laws that are being created, laws keeps all these things in mind, right? And the laws come into existence. Now what as HRs we can do is that we can be well aware of these laws, right? Our duty, our job is to be well aware of these jobs, which is very, very important. The industry that you belong to, for example, you can, for if we are talking about service industry, then yes, or we are talking about majority of industry, yes, this may be true. But if we are talking about let's say healthcare or medicine, or if we are talking about aviation, or if we are talking about any essential services, then labor law would account for that, because essential services have to run throughout 24/7 always. It cannot wait for uh, any eventuality. Even if you look at this whole COVID and the lockdowns that we are talking about, and if we are talking about all these elements, one thing that kept running even during proper lockdowns was essential services, right? So laws have a big impact when it comes to decision of leaves, right? Now, when we talk about leave management, we are talking about uh, um, human resource playing a major role in leave management. In fact, the whole policy around it, the discussion, the implementation, the calculations, everything, the wordings is decided by the HR department. So basically, we are the creators of leave policy of organizations and implementing leave policy within an organization, which is very, very important, right? Now, when we talk about what leave management impacts or what it should consider, we are talking about leave impacting following things. It impacts salary calculations. We would learn today. We would learn how loss of pay is calculated. It certainly impacts employee motivation. It is also about how compliant you are with labor laws, etc., of your country. And also, as I said, it is about a key differentiator in the best place. BPW rating is something that these ratings go about impacting, right? Now this is the first part, or the very, very basic concept of what leaves is, how it gets allotted, and what the leave is all about. But now we would get deeper into the topic, and we would talk about types of leaves, right? When we talk about type of leaves, you have paid leaves, you have earned leaves, and you have unpaid leaves, right? So you can see all these three things in terms of that. We would now categorize paid leaves. We would understand what earned leaves are, and then we will also understand that there is a concept of unpaid leaves also from case to case basis that it's good to have in a modern day uh, employee policy or HR policy or organizational policy to deal with all eventualities in a better manner, right? So you have paid leaves, you have earned leaves, and you have unpaid leaves, right? Unpaid leaves, right? So unpaid leaves is slightly different from loss of pay, and I would make you understand that towards the end, right? Now when we talk about paid leaves, what are paid leaves? So basically weekly offs are paid leaves, right? When we talk about let's say you're working from Monday to Friday and Saturday Sunday is an off, or when we are talking about working Monday to Thursday and Friday Saturday being off, or whatever, whichever element that we are talking about, we are talking about weekly offs, isn't it? We are talking about weekly offs, and weekly offs are paid for. So even if you get your salary or your salary slip, you would go about seeing that it says that a total number of days X and number of working days Y, and then even if there is a loss of pay, it's largely uh, it doesn't really occur with the weekly offs that we are talking about. Weekly off is something which is paid for, and so is national holiday. And also their organizations and most of the labor laws across industries, across countries, tell organizations to go with giving what we call a sick leave or medical leave, right? Which is very, very important, right? And then there is something called casual leave, and there is something called optional leave, or we also call it festive leaves, and then there is something called earned leave. So when we talk about paid leaves, this is the first set of paid leaves that we are talking about, which includes weekly offs, national holidays, sick leave, casual leave, optional leave, and earned leave. Now, another set of paid leave is uh, something that organizations should have in their leave policy, is the idea of compensatory off. You have maternity leave, which is largely driven by the labor law of the country, or if the organization wants to even give more than what the labor law of the country gives, then that is also welcome. And then you have paternity leave, and then you have bereavement leave, and then you have wedding leave, and you have loyalty leave, right? We will understand all of it one by one, but these are the kind of paid leaves that we are talking about. Not only that, I think you have also have paid leaves which can be given for very, very specific reason. It can be house shifting. A lot of times you have people being transferred from one place to another, and then it's important that you go about catering to that. Or some organizations, not necessarily just because you're shifting for organizational reason, but if you're also shifting for your own reason, they allow people 1 day or 2 day of house shifting leave. Then you have anniversary leave, and then you have birthday leave, and then you have a new thing that has come in by one of the organizations called Zomato in India, is menstruation leave for women, right? So when women have their periods, they can go about claiming an X number of days as leave, which is a very, very healthy practice. I think that's coming in, and it's about recognition, and it's about understanding the importance of this. And then a lot of organizations have what we call as foundation day leave as well, right? So we are talking about, so there can be various reasons for leaves being given, right? For example, the organization that I work for has a concept of birthday leaves. It says that it's your birthday and you should have a relaxed time, and it's not that they're looking at cutting cost on cake cuttings, etc. There's always a cake cutting celebration post when the person comes back to office, though lately it has all been happening virtually on Zoom. But then yes, so it is something that you go about seeing with different organizations. And sometimes there are organizations which go about giving you an anniversary leave and other leaves which are important, but these are all paid leaves that we are talking about, right? Now when we talk about weekly offs, I think whether it's 6 day working or a 5 day working, you go about giving weekly holiday to employees, and those are considered as your week offs. In number of organizations which are working 24 bar 7, like for example call centers, etc., you can go about giving weekly offs based on shift basis, or you can give them provide them with rotating weekly holidays. All this is something that you can go about doing. For example, this is a very interesting example. About 7 8 years back, 10 years back, call center industry in locations like Philippines, in India, in some locations in Africa, they were working more in terms of extra payments being made if a person is working on weekends, right? And so just like how shift allowance was given if you're working towards night as an additional income that you get because you're working at night, you were given you're sacrificing your social life in one way or the other if you're working on weekends, and if you are working on, let's say, certain holidays like festivals or etc. So especially with weekends, when we talk about weekly offs, because here we are talking about weekly offs, they were giving this, but then they thought of rotating shifts where people who are working Saturday, Sunday this month, next month they would not be working and somebody else would be working, and it would work in a cyclic manner where your cycle would come, let's say, every 3 months or 4 months. And they removed this whole concept of extra payment being made. So they were not only able to save the cost of extra payments being made in terms of uh, working on weekly offs, they were also able to contain this and bring more, I would say, uh, uh, bring about more equality in terms of how the leaves were spread by working around working on shift basis, which was very, very interesting, right? So that is something that you can go about considering. And then you have national holidays. I think national holidays, if you look at countries all across, Foundation Day is something that is celebrated all across. If you look at Independence Day, or if you look at Republic Day, or if you look at uh, birthday of founding fathers of a country, or some festival or some event which is related with the nation, with the country, the relevance of the country, right? It's called national holidays. So anything, it is not anything to do with the culture, right? It is something to do with nation, right? Something to do with the country. Anything that is associated with that is something that is important. For example, if you look at Foundation Day, then China celebrates a national holiday for about 7 to 8 days. So apart from Chinese New Year, it also goes about celebrating uh, its Foundation Day for 7 to 8 days as formation of the country. And similarly, almost all countries in terms of foundation have one or the other things that necessarily are happening. But just to tell you that there are different aspects of national holiday. For example, in India, you have two holidays which are uh, uh, largely connected to the nation, and two more national holidays, one more national holiday which is also connected to the nation. For example, you have Independence Day, and you have Republic Day, and you have what we call Gandhi Jayanti, where Mahatma Gandhi was born. And that all these 3 days are considered as national holidays because they are connected with the nation or the founding fathers of the nation, right? Now, when we talk about sick leave, this sick leave is largely a medical leave. It is given on on grounds of sickness, and you can have various policies around it, right, depending on how you want to implement it. When we talk about, let's say, 1 day leave, you may skip a medical certificate. But if you are talking about 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or let's say 1 or 2 days leave, then you may skip it. But if you're talking about good number of days of leave that has been taken or it has been exhausted, then you can go about asking for a medical certificate and make it slightly more difficult for people to take leaves with this reason, or at least know the real reason why people are taking leaves in case of long-term leave absence in terms of sickness, right? So yes, sick leave is something though no leave is sickening, but then when we talk about sick leaves, yes, it is a very, very valid reason for people to go about taking leaves, and so is casual leave. When we talk about casual leave, we are talking about anything to do with urgent, not necessarily will health, but there can be a lot of other things that you cater to, right? It can be your family, it can be some emergency, it can be something else, it can be some homework, it can be some X and Y and Z that you are doing, it can be some course that you're doing for which you have to go about taking leaves. Anything that we are talking about, anything that can be considered in that is can be called a casual leave, right? Now, remember this, if all of you can make notes, and towards the end of the webinar, I'll take all your questions down, right? So all your questions down, I'll take towards the end of the webinar, but let me just cover this topic quickly, and then we will move ahead on that, right? So just in case you have any thoughts, anything you would like to want, you want to clarify, anything you would want opinion on or discussion on, and you would want me to cover or elaborate, please feel free. And towards the end, I would make sure that I would come back and I would cover this up for you, right? So yes, we have talked about weekly off. We have talked about national holidays. We have talked about sick leaves. We have talked about casual leave, and then you have optional leaves. Now, optional leave is largely restricted holidays. It is largely considered specific to holidays that is being given to in countries, right? And it is very, very interesting because if you look at, again, I always take this example of my country, which is India, where we always proudly say that it is unity and diversity, and we talk about people from different faiths and different religion and different people being part of this. And when we talk about this, we are talking about celebrating so many festivals, right? So, for example, just now there was Dashera, and what is coming ahead is Diwali, and then there would be Christmas, and then there would be New Year's, and then there would be Eid, and then there would be the various the Guru Govind Singh Jayanti. There would be so many festivals which would be representing different important days. And when you create a list of these festivals, and in a very, very good example is India, because for example, when you create a list of optional leaves, it can go up to 20 to 30 optional leaves, but you cannot go about allowing people to take all these leaves, right? So you set a number of optional leaves. So for example, let's say you say that maximum optional leave a person can take is 10 or 12, right? And the total number of optional leave is, let's say, 24. So the person can take 12 leaves out of this 24. So whatever appeals to him, to his faith, to his understanding, to what he or she wants to celebrate, they can go about taking the leave specific to that, right? Now, optional leaves sometimes can become definite also, because for example, if for Diwali, all the leaves, which is Festival of Lights, all the leaves are closed, all the offices are closed in India, then certainly, though it's an optional leave, but because the office itself is closed, this optional leave is definitely being absorbed in there, right? So it becomes an optional definite leave, right? And that's why it's called restricted at times, because first of all, you're not allowed to take all the leaves. And second of all, even it's in its application, it is not absolutely optional, right? Which means if our organization decides to go about closing an office on a particular day, your leave count would reduce, whether you wanted to celebrate, let's say Diwali, or you didn't want to celebrate Diwali. But if you had 12 leaves, now it becomes 11. So, or let's say if New Year's Day or 31st, the office has to be closed, then it will be closed, right? It is something that becomes an optional definite holiday, right? That is something that you can go about doing. So you need to keep all this thing in mind while creating a policy, because uh, also people offices with multiple locations. For example, in India, we have offices in Bangalore, in Chennai, in Hyderabad, in Mumbai, in Delhi, different with different locations. Now, when we create a leave calendar, we have to think of what is important where. For example, in Tamil Nadu, Tamil New Year is more important, and in Karnataka, the state that I'm in right now, you have Karnataka Rajyotsava, which is important, and so these becomes optional definite holidays, because their offices have to be closed on this particular day. But for example, Holi, which is festival of colors, which is celebrated with so much vigor in North India, which is not being celebrated in that aspect in South India. You would find Holi to be a definite holiday in entire of North India, but you would not see that. You would see it as an optional holiday in here. So it would, again, when you are keeping when you're creating policies, you have to think of all these aspects. Now, for certain regions across the globe, it may be very, very easy, because even when we are talking about optional holiday, you can just talk about festive leaves. So you can replace this, because you can then limit leaves specific to the festival that the entire region celebrates, right? Because if the entire country, in terms of its ethnicity, in term is not, very, very diverse, then almost everybody is following similar things. Then what would matter to them in terms of celebrations, in terms of festival, is similar things, right? So you can go about doing that as well. But here, taking an example of India, it makes so much sense, because it gives you leverage in terms of this, and even for a lot of organizations and countries otherwise, it would make so much sense, because if you come up with an optional leave policy, you would you would drive what we call as diversity and inclusion in the organization, isn't it? Which is very, very important. So if you're any country in this world which is seeing a diverse workforce, also not necessary diverse ethnicity of everybody who's there in the country, but places like GCC countries like Dubai, like Abu Dhabi, like Riyadh, etc., if they are able to come up with deep policies which talk about optional leaves, you're not impacting the leaves by increasing the number of days of leaves. You're not doing that, right? Let's understand the days remain the same. It's just that you give people a choice in terms of opting for leaves that matter to them, which is very, very important. And that is what is the beauty of optional leaves, right? And then we are talking about maternity leave, very, very important leave. I think there is a new life that's shaping its form, and it's important that the woman bearing the child is given a leave specific to pre and post pregnancy, pre-pregnancy for self-care and childcare, and post-pregnancy especially for childcare, also for self-care, but largely that is something that you can go about doing. There are very, very specific, interesting laws about maternity leaves and paternity leaves in the globe, and there are X number of leaves that you can go about taking before the birth of child, and X number of days of leave that you can take after the death of the child in terms of number of weeks. But if you look at, we are talking about Canada having about 17 weeks paid leave, Saudi having about 10 weeks paid leave. India recently increased the number of weeks to 26 weeks paid leaves. We are talking about Nigeria, which is 12 weeks paid leaves, Australia, which is 18 weeks paid leaves. USA is very interesting. I think there is no statutory law as such, but as per the Family and Medical Leave Act, 12 weeks of unpaid leaves is allowed, and it is also very specific to the state that that you are staying in. So that is something that you can go about guessing. Whereas we always feel that in the West it would be so good, but that's true. In West also it's good. For example, if I take an example of Sweden, we are talking about 480 days, which is 365 is 1 year, right? 480 days is almost 4 months more, right? So we are talking about 1 year, 4 months, which is we are talking about 16 months of paid leaves, and this is given to both parents, right? Which means whether it's a father or a mother, both they both get maternity and paternity leave, which is very, very interesting, isn't it? Right. So maternity leave is important, and then you have compensatory off. What is compensatory off? So for various reasons for work, you may take a comp off. You may be working for one of the offs that was there. For example, it can be any holiday. It can be a weekly off. It can be a national holiday. It can be optional leave. It can be anything. If you were working on that day and you really wanted to take off, right? But because of work reasons, you end up at workplace, or you end up participating in work, right? Even from home, which technically means that you work that day and you should be allowed to take a compensatory off, right? Now, some organizations, they restrict compensatory off only against weekly offs, right? Which means, let's say if Saturday, Sunday is off and you worked on one of the Saturdays, you were allowed to take a comp off somewhere, some other day, right? But some organizations are flexible enough. They say that you have X number of leaves, you have to go about using these X number of leaves, and just in case if you take work on any of these days and any which way you want to take a leave any other day, they can also go about doing that, right? So again, when you're looking at leave policy, think of all these things, right? For example, when we talk about comp off, should compensatory off only be linked with weekly offs, or it can also be linked with national holidays, or it can be also be linked with definite optional holidays when we are talking about, or any other optional holiday, or how you would want to plan it, what level of flexibility you want to give, what are the kind of occurrences that are happening in the organization. Are there any previous cases in which there was some important work which was not completed, or there was adjustments that were needed to be made because of situations like these. All of it is something that you need to go about asking when you think of dwelling deeper in terms of how would you want to project and create compensatory off structure in your organization, right? And then you have bereavement leaves. Bereavement leave is largely in case of death of a family member or a relative. A lot of times while creating a leave management policy, they say that it should be an immediate family member. They go about making sure that it is something that gets listed down, that if in case of a death of a, and sometimes bereavement leaves can also, they say bereavement or in case of, even in case of serious accidents of immediate family member or a relative or a friend, they go about making a larger case out of it. But largely when we talk about bereavement leave, it is in case of a death of a family member, immediate family member or relative, is something that is given. You have organizations which have gone about giving 1 day, 7 day, up to 13 day, 14 day of bereavement leave, but largely it's mainly restricted to 1 or 2 days of bereavement leave is something that you can go about getting, right? Then we are talking about earned leave. This is a very interesting leave and it has been used in various ways. When we talk about earned leave, we are talking about uh, 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 there is a privilege associated with this leave, right? The privilege associated with this leave is that in case if you don't take this leave, right, you will get extra money paid for it, right? So think of it as in this way: there is earned leave. You are given these leaves uh, to use, but just in case you don't take this leave, right? So if you take this leave, nothing happens. You, no loss of pay happens. You still get your entire salary because you've just gone about using this. But just in case you have gone about uh, 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 not taking this leave, then extra money is paid to you, right? Extra money is paid to you. That's why it's called privilege leave. For example, if we talk about a country like India, we are talking about this whole idea of earned leave and leave encashment going hand in hand. So by the law of the country, they say that every 20 working day, you should have one earned leave given to the employee, right? So if a person is, let's say, working 240 days in a year, and this should leave weekly offs taken off and other things taken off, right? All other leaves taken off, right? All casual leave, sick leave, all that has been allotted to an employee, all that is taken off. And based on the number of days the person is working, every 20 working day, if one leave is given, let's say in a year you are given 15 to 20 earned leaves, you allow an employee to carry forward some leaves, or you stop the employee from taking forward all the leaves, and you tell them that you have to, for example, if in one of the uh, 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 laws with the government of India is that if there is 21 earned leaves, you can carry forward 14-day leave, right? And 7-day leave you have to go about taking mandatorily. So depending, again, if there is a compliance around it, well and good. But just in case if there is no compliance around it, then you can go about making it the way you like it. But the interesting bit here is that not taking a leave is helping you earn money, right? Which is a very, very interesting message, right? And it has also been beautifully used, for example, in call center industry, where every every hour is important, because how is call center industry working? They are billing their clients. How are they billing their clients? So per seat, they are billing their clients per hour. So for example, let's say if we are talking about a person working in a company for 8 hours, and we are talking about a $20 per hour rate or for that seat. So we are talking about 160 to $200 is the net earnings that the person is doing by sitting on the seat, earning $20 to $25 for 8 hours a day. Right now, if a person goes about taking leave, you are paying him salary, but at the same time you're losing this 160, $180. So some of the companies, what they did was, they, just because this was causing loss of revenue, they made all leaves, which means sick leaves, casual leaves, and earned leaves. They made all leaves earned leaves as part of policy. They made it as part of policy because this would encourage people not from taking leaves. And this would reduce what we call is the entitlement mentality. Now, what is the entitlement mentality? I'm entitled for this leave. Leave is my birthright. If I don't take this leave would lapse. So I will, no matter what, I will go about taking this leave. Right? That is how employees most of the time behave. Right? And I'm not saying it's a wrong behavior. Anybody should behave like that because they have entitled leaves. Right? But then, just in case, if this is something that is being given, then this is very interesting because think of it. You are allowing employees to earn more. At the same time, by them being present more, you are also earning more, right? So in situations where revenues are directly getting impacted, organizations are coming up with some very, very interesting leave encashment policy, right? So, and you're not breaking any law in here because law would have been broken if there was no earned leaves, especially to a country like India. But depending on whichever country you belong to, because Indian laws are largely Anglo laws, right? Anglo-Indian laws, right? And Anglo-Indian laws are almost applicable in about 60 countries across the globe, right? So a lot of you who are listening, if Britishers ever were part of your history, then a lot of laws that you must be following even today are Anglo laws, right? And these laws in terms of earned leaves, etc., might be, I'm not sure. I mean, unless there was some ratification done, it must be the case with a lot of countries otherwise, right? So if, or otherwise, if there is an earned leave, then then it's well and good. But then this is how exactly you go about managing. Think of it, right? So you also think, while creating a policy, you also think of the, so now in age of HRBP and HR business partner, etc., we are talking about departmental wise leave policies also. So one department can have a different leave policy, another department can have a different leave policy, right? So you can also go about identifying where would you like to apply what kind of leave policy, which is very, very interesting, right? And this is a very good example in terms of how an existing leave can be used for an organization benefit in terms of ensuring that organization revenues don't get impacted. At the same time, you give a very good message back to the employees that we have made all leaves as earned leave, and then this entitlement mentality is something that is getting reduced, right? Very interesting, right? So these were all the types of leaves that we talked about. We talked about number of leaves. We talked about national holidays. We talked about weekly offs. We talked about optional holidays. We talked about casual leaves. We talked about sick leaves. We talked about maternity leaves. We talked about your bereavement leave. We talked about earned leaves. So these are different types of leaves that we are talking about. Apart from that, I think birthday leaves, anniversary leaves, loyalty leaves, for example. Again, we have a leave policy in our organization where anybody who completes 1 year is entitled for 7 days of leave, right? Additional 7 days of leave, which has to be taken in one go because we want people to take a break for 7-8 days, not think about work at all, relax, chill with their families, go on a holiday, etc. So we give them a 7-day leave every year post which they finish, which has to be taken within 6 months of them finishing that 1 year, right? Which is very interesting, right? So that these are all leaves which are over and above, which is largely for a BPW ratings. I will not say necessarily for BPW ratings, but also the belief systems of the founders and people who are creating and running the organization, the kind of vision that they have in terms of the way they want to consider employee and the work, etc., is something that is taken care of, right? So one of the organizations I was consulting, they had 1 day of leave in a year you can take by calling it, I don't feel like coming to work today, right? Which is very interesting, right? So you actually apply that leave in the LMS, you in the software, in the leave management software, you had something called I don't feel like working today leave, and you could take 1 day leave like that in a year in terms of that, which is very interesting. So you can be very, very uh, uh, innovative, creative about the kind of leaves that you want to create, right? So these were all the types of leaves that we are talking about, and now we are talking about loss of pay. Now, loss of pay is largely, it's a very, very simple calculations. There are two ways of calculating it. One is that you consider the number of days in the month to be the actual number of days. For example, normally Feb is 28 days. There are months which are either 30 days or 31 days. And on leap years, Feb is 29 days. So if you can go about considering the actual number of days in the month for this calculation, or you can just simply consider all months to be 30 days, right? So these are two ways you can go about considering, right? Some people want actual number of days in a month. Some people consider all days to be 30 days, right? Now let's take an example. Let's say somebody's salary is 10,000, whether it's a USD or INR, does not matter. How do you calculate LOP for 3 days? LOP is loss of pay, right? So the person has exhausted all his her leaves, right? And now we are talking about the LOP happening, right? So how would you go about calculating it? So this is how you would go about calculating it. LOP, loss of pay, is the salary, total salary, divided by number of days in a month, which is 28, 29, 30, or 31, depending on the month and the year, into the number of days of leave taken. So it would be 10,000 divided by, let's say we are talking about October. October is 31 days. So 10,000 divided by 31 to 3, if 3 days of leave is taken. Now this is how you go about calculating, and it should figure in your payroll, which means it should figure in your salary slip in terms of the loss of pay that is being done, or the loss of pay that is being calculated, right? So this is how exactly, though this says 30, we are talking about September then, or November, but not October, because October is 31, or this is the organization which is considering all days in the month to be 30 days. So even for Feb, the calculation will remain the same. Even for December, the calculation will remain the same. And even for October, the calculation would remain the same. And that is a example of how loss of pay is calculated, right? Now, very important thing, and I want everybody to pay attention here, because we are going to talk about how do you create an efficient and effective leave policy. And here we are talking about leave calendar, right? Now, normally, the larger perspective that we saw for a greater time in last 40, 50 years was a yearly leave calendar, which means in the beginning of the year, whether it was the financial year or the year, for example, a lot of organizations would start their leave calendar from 1st of Jan and end it on 31st of December. Some companies would stick to the financial year, whatever they are following. For example, India follows financial year from 1st of April to 31st of March. So it can also be that, depending on how you want to go about doing it. You would have a yearly leave calendar. You would go about announcing all the leaves that are there available to employees, and then they can go about taking this leave. That was the concept of yearly leave calendar, right? Now, but with yearly leave calendar, there was a common issue, right? Look at this. This is a case, right? One of the cases that were encountered by one of the organizations. An organization has 24 leaves per annum. In a year, there was 24 leaves. The leaves were as follows: 4 national holidays, six optional holidays, 10 sick leaves, and 4 casual leaves, right? A person works for 6 months and takes 18 leaves and resigns from the company, right? 2 national holidays, 2 optional holidays, 10 sick leaves, and 4 casual leaves. Uh, how do you create then a leave management structure to avoid such instances in the future? Now, what has happened? Let's talk about this for a minute, right? Read this. Give me a moment. Yeah. So for a year, for an entire year, you are allowed 24 days of leave. Yeah. The person has worked for 6 months. So basically, logically, the person should have used about 12 leaves, right? Now, the person has taken 18 leaves and he has left the organization. So in 6 months, he has gone about exhausting 6 more leaves, right? Than what was he was accounted for, and then he has left. And now this is a pure loss to the organization, because what is leave? Leave is something which is paid. Though the person has not worked, and you have still gone about paying him. So then how do you cater to this? Because you have created a yearly leave calendar, and the person is, so what would you do if you were quitting an organization and you knew that you have 10 leaves in hand? What would you do? Whichever leave you could have taken, you would have gone about exhausting it, so that after that you go about quitting, right? A lot of people go about doing this. I'm not saying not you. I mean, I'm saying a lot of people go about doing this, right? So how do we avoid this? To avoid this, uh, the concept of leave credit policy came into picture, which is very interesting. Huh? Leave credit policy. Now, what is a leave credit policy? Leave credit policy is that there are 24 leaves in a year. And let's say you start from January, right? But then the leave credit policy, would the leaves would get credited to your account month on month or quarter on quarter. So for example, if we are talking about a monthly leave calendar under leave credit policy, then if there are 24 leaves, then Jan to December, you are allotted 2 leaves per month. Now let's talk about Jan then. So if in Jan I take 2 leaves and I take a third leave, I'll have a loss of pay then and there itself, right? And if I don't take these 2 leaves and then I go to month of Feb, then these 2 leaves will get credited to my Feb calendar as well, which means now in Feb, I can take 4 leaves. This may include any leave. It may include optional leaves. It may include national holidays. It may include X and Y and Z leaves. It does not matter, right? Now, let's say in Feb, now I took 3 leaves. Now I have 4 leaves. Now I took 3 leaves. Then in March, I will have 3 leaves again because one from Feb would move to March and 2 in March already exist, right? So this is monthly leave calendar. So you're working on a credit policy. So you have gone about crediting 2 leaves every month for all these months. And now month on month, as I move in, I go about seeing more and more leaves or loss of pay then and there. So if this was the case, then the person would have not been able to do it, because in 6 months he would not have had more than 12 leaves under the kitty, right? And a 13th leave would have made him lose money. So he could not have then taken 18 leaves because the way leave was allotted would have not worked. And the same thing would work in quarterly also, because if we are talking about 24 leaves, then we are talking about 6 leave every quarter. So Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 will have six leaves. And if I absorb all my 6 leaves and still I take one more leave, there is loss of pay in that quarter itself. And if not, then I move forward, whatever if 2 leaves are remaining out of 6, then now in the next quarter, I can take 8 leaves, and accordingly I can plan and I can work around and I can take long leaves if I want by accumulating leaves. And that is something that I can go about doing, right? So the modern way of implementing leave policy is not to implement it in a yearly calendar, but come up with a leave credit policy. And depending on the size of the organization, depending on the technology that you're using in your organization, implement it monthly or quarterly. For smaller setups, monthly leave calendar can be done. For bigger organization, quarterly leave calendar can be done. Great. So now this is how the whole thing is moving ahead, which is very, very interesting. You go about creating something called a leave credit policy, which is very, very important. Now coming to this very important aspect as well, which is HRM and pandemic. How is HR changing in this pandemic that we are talking about, right? So we are talking about remote working, we are talking about infrastructure support, we are talking about health and safety, we are talking about learning continuity, we are talking about level of absenteeism. All this is changing and HR has to deal with all these things. These are burning issues in terms of human resource management and policymakers today, right? All of it, right? Not only this, there is more. There is travel policy and procedures. There is response to changing scenarios because things are changing month on month. You don't know how exactly it is working, right? What is the communication strategy? What are you doing with critical resource safety? There are resources which are very, very critical to the organization. For example, a captain in a football team or a cricket team is a very, very critical resource. Similarly, what are you doing with your critical resource is very, very important. And then you have compensation strategies changing with HRM. There is leave policy, which is changing with HRM, and then there is cost reduction, which is changing in HRM, right? Now, all this is changing in pandemic and HR has to deal with it. In fact, I would want you to go to YouTube and there is a webinar by me on HRM and pandemic. You go and watch it. You also please do like and subscribe it because you would then get updated on this. But then these are all things that are changing in the pandemic, that the situation that we are in. But we are discussing leave policy. So I would remain limited to the discussion on leave policy because other elements is something that cannot be covered in the short time that we are in here, right? So when we talk about leave policy, if in pandemic situation, how is the world responding to it? So this is how the world is responding to it. One is sick leaves are being modified. Now this is being intimated that sick leaves are being modified to be flexible enough with the public health guideline of the country, which is very, very important, right? For example, ICMR is in India, CDC is in US. So similarly, every country has a medical board which is setting guidelines. It's important that we as HRs go about reading these guidelines to understand and formulate and include if some radical changes or some important changes are being made into the leave policy, which is very, very important, right? That is something that we have to go about talking in including. So we have to think of, so this is country specific. Second thing is, if somebody is suffering from COVID-19, or somebody is suffering from Wuhan virus, or somebody is suffering from uh, corona, uh, 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 there should be a very, very clear policy in terms of when should a person return to office, right? And this should be directed by a doctor's confirmation. But at the same time, you may be little flexible in terms of giving him additional days, or not deducting money, or not causing loss of pay, because there is a it's a pandemic leave situation. So it is not some regular health situation. We are not talking about normal fever. We are talking about COVID-19. We are talking about corona, and in that case, we are talking about in terms of this, right? Then organizations are making flexible leave without pay, or provisions for only paying fixed component, or paying 50%, 25% pay to employees on leave, right? That is something that is also organizations are looking at changing, right? Some organizations are changing document waive off, which means you do not need to get medical bills entirely medical, because it's about going to the doctor and meeting, and the whole idea is to involve less interactions. So if even somebody is uh, unsafe, or not unsafe, somebody is unwell because of whatever reason, it might be anything, it might not be something related to pandemic, but still for the person to go and get a medical certificate to show you to prove a leave is something that is being waived off increasingly, right? So all these changes are being made for the period of pandemic by organizations, right? And as HRs and people who are listening, they should be able to go about doing this. Then there is concept of PTO, they are saying paid time off. So people who are suffering from corona, not only that, if just in case the work is not needed by a person to do, but as part of a goodwill gesture, you want to ensure people are getting paid, whether whatever amount of salary that we are talking about, you are giving them paid time off. That is something that you need to think in terms of bringing in terms of leave policy of today. And then we are talking about leaves pre and post travel. So for urgent reasons regarding to work, if there is within country and outside country travel involved, and then there are specific guidelines around it, and then there is mandatory quarantine that people have to go through, and accessibility of things for working from home or working from hotel or etc. is not possible. Then know you have to include that in the leave policy. You cannot then go about deducting leave for any other reason, right? And then some organizations are giving caregiver leave. They have added a new kind of leave, which is called a caregiver leave, where if one of the family members of the employee is suffering from corona, which is a highly likely scenario in pandemic that can happen with people, then you are talking about that as well, right? That is something that you are going to add as a leave, right? So all this is changing. So we have to think in this aspect as well, right? Not only in terms of all that I discussed, which was generic, but even with every evolving scenario, pandemic is impacting a lot of things. But one very important thing that it's impacting is also leave policy, right? And then there is this whole word called furlough that has come in, right? Which is about laying off people temporary out of work, right? Till you don't need them. And so basically they remain your employee, and you don't pay anything to them, and it is like an unpaid leave that is being given to them, just like earlier organization used to give education leave which was unpaid for a year or so. It's being called furlough in this case, where temporary layoff from work is being given, and that option is also being included in organizational policies, which is very, very important, right? Which is very, very important.
To subscribe to CPD membership and learn more about HR operations course, click on the I icon above.